speaking of Tory hustings and indeed all things political, I'm joined by our future politics panel. Joining me today are Jonathan Gibson and Reem Ibrahim, both who are political commentators. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
All right, thank you very much. Yes, so I think we've got 8 days still to go of this ridiculous contest. I mean, it is ridiculous, isn't it?
It is. It's going on and on and on. I mean, I think all of us know who's going to win. It's Liz Truss. Of course we do. We all know she's going to win.
Do you agree?
I do agree.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. She's going to win. We all know that's going to happen. We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Energy bills going through the roof. We just really want to get a Prime Minister into number 10 and get on with the job.
I think it's just actually embarrassing now.
No, it is. It's ridiculous, the fact that there's been a complete lack of action in recent weeks and it's been drawn into this sort of, as was just mentioned, leadership contest, which is turning into a reality TV show where they're just taking chunks out of each other.
Absolutely right. And of course, these extraordinary things. Yesterday, I was talking about this, but basically Rishi Sunak, I honestly thought this was the most incredible thing when Rishi Sunak said, I think we gave Sage too much power, and clearly I voted against it and we didn't really understand what we were doing. Didn't you think this was a really extraordinary intervention and at a very late stage?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that Sunak has sort of thrown out there in the middle of the campaign has been really quite odd. I mean, he started off the campaign sort of being the more, left-wing economics candidate, sort of, sensible, pragmatic approach to economics. Then he realised that he was going to lose all the voters, so then he went full-blown culture war, war on woke, and nobody believed a word that he was saying. And now we're getting this. I mean, I think it's really quite desperate at this point. He's sort of trying to get there towards the end.
But you see, the extraordinary thing, Jonathan, if he'd said this early, I think it would have made a big difference. Just to remind you, he said ministers were wrong to scare the public. It was wrong to empower scientists to such a degree. The major mistake was to allow Sage to have so much say over policy. He was there. He was in the room.
I mean, Sage is an important body. It doesn't have say over policy in that it doesn't create the laws. It doesn't create what our government policies are. And it's so random for it to be almost like a year on from when there were 2 years on from when there were starting to be lockdown policies implemented, for him to suddenly go, oh, this was terrible. Like, whether or not it was or wasn't, he could have resigned, he could have said something earlier. It seems very, very opportunist, rather than it coming from an actual sense of belief as to whether that's the case or not. And it does seem really, really bizarre to just chuck it in randomly when it's such a big thing that has shaped the government over the last 2 years.
But you see, that's the point, is that many of those Conservative members, I think, will have voted. We don't know that. But surely, if you're going to do that, and many elderly and older people were very concerned about the way Sage was used, remember, following the science. Well, what that meant was abrogating of your responsibility as a government to make a decision, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, as young people, we were told, don't kill your gran.
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah, so all of this sort of stuff about, blaming young people for, going out with their friends or being able to talk to people, being able to actually have social interactions. I mean, it was really quite sad. I think a lot of our mental health, really suffered during the lockdown period. And we were, as young people, we were blamed by it. So now here, I'm quite annoyed to hear Rishi Sunak say this stuff now, all of a sudden. I mean, it's just really quite silly.
And that goes back to the bigger point for me about both candidates, is they were both there. They were both part of that administration. So we've talked about this before. It is not a new broom. You don't have really a new government, and I think things are going to be very difficult, to say the least. Let me ask you, Jonathan, when do you think it all went wrong for Rishi Sunak?
I think it went wrong from even before he sort of stood down his resignation, because I think the key factors for him in terms of his failing was, number one, he didn't like Boris and he resigned. And we've seen in a recent poll among Tory members that 50% of them would still back Boris. Number two, his policies sort of very, very unpopular. His tax policies clearly among the Tory electorate. He definitely did not go down the easy route when it came to the things that he was promising. He was also seen as very out of touch, for example, his shoes, his home, his heated swimming pool, his wife's status in this country, very out of touch. And he's almost a bit technocratic for a lot of people. He talks about how his inspiring moment was when he was in California, in the West Coast, and people don't really resonate with that in a way. I don't feel as a candidate he was very easy to resonate with, because he wasn't like a run-of-the-mill person you'd find on the street.
So it's really interesting you mentioned that particular thing. In the Telegraph today, they think that is the date where he mentioned California the whole time. Because actually, Reem, people don't care what happened in California, do they? No. This was apparently on August the 5th.
Absolutely. I think that we're trying to pin down a specific date and turning point is quite difficult, because I think it was a culmination of all of these different factors. Him as a character and his personality is just completely out of touch. People don't resonate with people like that. He's, again, with his wealth, but also nobody has stories like that. Nobody else, not a normal person in the UK has gone to California and changed their life. It's just not something that's normal for any of us, and so we can't see him as a Prime Minister.
No, it's interesting. So, and also just in terms of his U-turns the whole time, his U-turn on the VAT on energy bills, he started off in a very pragmatic setting out his policy, I think, in a pragmatic way, and then he just kept changing the rules, didn't he? Because he knew he was losing.
I think it's really interesting that both as Chancellor and as a vying candidate, he started with popularity. At the start, when he was Chancellor and dishing out money through his furlough scheme, he was seen as Dishy Rishi. He was the one who was very frequently talked about with a lot of popularity and a lot of support, and from then it just sort of went down, and we've seen the same in sort of the leadership race. His popularity has just gone down, and in another way you could see it as, for example, when you're dishing out money, it's quite easy to do. It's quite easy to gain support from that. When you're saying,
you make friends.
Exactly, you make friends. When you're saying, oh, I can't do that anymore, it's a little bit harder. So that's, I think, also been another reason for his decline in popularity, but there's clearly more to it than just that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for the moment. Welcome back to Weekend Breakfast with me, David Bull. Time just after 8:30 on Sunday, August the 28th. I'm joined by Jonathan Gibson and Reem Ibrahim, both political commentators and the future of British politics, may I say. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you for having us on.
So let's just talk about... So we spoke about Rishi Sunak and where it all went horribly wrong for him. In terms of where we are now, 8 more days to go until we might have a functioning executive. Interestingly, I spoke to lots of MPs yesterday who assured me the government was working. Well, you could have fooled me. But essentially, we will then have a Prime Minister in place. It is a poison chalice, isn't it, Reem?
No, absolutely. I mean, look at all of the issues that Liz Truss it will be Liz Truss that wins.
So
we'll have to deal with. I mean, you've got the cost of living crisis, you've got soaring energy bills, and in my view, her plan is sort of the best way forward. I'm quite glad to see her win. Her plan is to cut the green levy to make sure that energy bills are from the get-go going to be cheaper. Her plan is to cut taxes to make sure that businesses are able to completely grow and succeed within the economy, and actually, hopefully, we'll then be able to avoid a recession. And I think, her plan is really quite straightforward. It's about letting people have more of their own money in their own pockets.
So she is also considering, according to the papers this morning, a nuclear 5% VAT cut across the board. This is mirroring what Gordon Brown did in 2008, cutting VAT from 17.5% down to 15%. That is what he did. Would you welcome that?
That I would more welcome, because my problem with Liz Truss, and I think we've mentioned this before, is that I don't think her tax proposals are firstly feasible, and secondly, I don't think they help those that need it the most. Whereas the VAT
we spoke this week about it, didn't we?
We did.
And your view is that actually it's too blunt an instrument.
What is too blunt?
The tax cuts are that they don't benefit the people who actually...
Green levy is £150. Her national insurance for the average person on 20,000 income is about £900. It's not feasible. The majority of her 30 billion tax cuts are for businesses rather than individuals, at a time when I think personally that we need to help individuals the most. We need to have handouts, and Rishi's used the line frequently of saying you can't have tax cuts and handouts and maintain a national budget, which is at all feasible. So I think that she's going to have a very difficult job in actually carrying out the policies, because to me I'm quite cynical of the idea that it's feasible to both provide handouts, which is what she's had to start saying she will do because of people showing it's not feasible, as well as having tax cuts and maintaining a national budget at a time when infrastructure...
So did that mean that you actually favoured Rishi then? You thought that, yes, because that it was more pragmatic to you?
I thought economically it was far more pragmatic. I thought it's far more realistic, and I understand that it's not an easy route to take. It's not a vote winner. It's not something nice to say, and I didn't favour essentially all of his policies, for sure. So
did he get it wrong by being honest with it? Because essentially he's only playing to 150,000 people, isn't he?
Yeah, I think he did get it wrong. I think clearly he was, in my opinion, his economics was better, but he was not popular for it. People don't like hearing we're going to keep taxes high. Nobody wants high taxes on themselves. At the end of the day, it's not practical for our country in a time of a cost of living crisis to simply just say, oh, we're going to cut taxes for those in the middle and essentially leave people...
OK, so what about this thing about cutting fuel duty? Because it seems to me that this is one thing that they could do would help a lot of people. She's talking about 5p cut in fuel duty. I'm not sure that's enough.
So again, my preferred personal policy of it would be handouts and things like which really support people at the bottom, because...
But what about the middle classes? They're really hurting.
I know the middle classes are hurting, for sure. Of course they are. But the problem is everyone is going to be hurting in this country.
So you're not going to help the middle classes?
People are going to die. Martin Lewis came out and said people are going to die. This is a national
Martin Lewis is not a politician.
He's not a politician.
No.
He's not a politician, you're right. But he is someone that is quite good on...
I wasn't even sure why Martin Lewis was on the top of the news, to be honest.
Why was he talking about it? Jonathan, I have to say, I do disagree with you about sort of, cutting taxes for businesses doesn't help the worst off in this country. Who creates jobs? It's businesses. Who drives growth within the economy? It's businesses. If we're restricting growth, choking off growth using taxation, we are not going to be able to get ourselves out of this crisis without a recession. We need to make sure that we are able to grow the economy, that we invest in businesses, and that actually those tax cuts will benefit people, because people will be working at those companies.
So let me just interject with that. The one thing that I do think we need to look at very seriously is an energy price cap for business, because I am deeply worried about the number of pubs that will go out of business. I'm worried about those small businesses. And are you not concerned that actually if we lose all of those, we will never get them back?
I'm massively concerned about that. I think it's a massive, massive problem, and energy prices are skyrocketing, and clearly there needs to be some form of action in order to stop the prices just keeping going up and up and up, and there needs to be policies ensured and regulation to make sure that can't happen and people are able to afford energy costs, because businesses are going out. And I went to a pub the other day, and I think that pub might well be closing soon, so I am worried about that.
Well, we heard about pubs who are saying they're closing their doors literally on the 1st of October because they know they cannot actually make ends meet. Now, that brings us nicely into energy generally. I think we've seen various political parties setting out their stalls. I mean, it's interesting, actually. The Labour Party said they want to insulate all the homes. Well, that won't be easy, will it, quickly? That's not going to help at all. Double onshore and offshore wind capacity, commit to new solar, tidal and hydrogen, and end the delay on nuclear power stations. Now, obviously, Sizewell C's been given the go-ahead since that was written, but none of that's going to help in the short term. And clearly, and I've been very clear, I think fracking plays a big role in this, certainly in the short term. Ed Davey this morning came out and said and I quote, "I am proud of stopping fracking." And essentially, he was Energy Secretary in 2012 to 2015. He fought the by-elections on anti-fracking. And the reason he stopped it is because the tremor, the threshold to tremor is so small, 0.5%. I think if you cough whilst you go past a house, you probably get a tremor of that. I mean, should Ed Davey be proud?
No, absolutely not. Look, I mean, whilst we have the fracking available for us, we should be able to use it. And I completely agree with sort of the environmental concerns. I think that in the long term we can think about those things, but actually in the short term we need to use the supply that we have. And remember, basic economics 101: when you increase the supply of something, the prices will decrease. Ed is completely wrong saying that fracking won't help with energy prices at all. It's completely wrong. When you increase the supply, it will bring down prices. I think that on this sort of energy price cap, my only concern about that is actually that when you artificially fix a price, as soon as you lift that cap, the prices will go up through the roof. So I think it's something to be concerned about in the long term as well. So
interesting with regards to Ed Davey, he says fracking is not needed because of our success in renewables.
In 2012, Nick Clegg said that he was not going to support nuclear power. Why? Because it would be such a delay. It would be until 2021 until the first nuclear power station was built. I mean, why would we want nuclear power now? Renewable energy from our own country. And that is the point, isn't it? We don't at the moment have a cheap alternative. We don't have a domestic supply which is cheap and affordable, and as a result people are suffering, and it's a national sort of crisis at the moment.
I agree completely. I'm just going to look up exactly what we are now generating. There is a website that shows you this, but so it's a very nice day today, I think. So we should be actually making sure that we have a lot of renewables. Here we are. Look, so 12.8% right this minute from renewables. It's woeful.
Yeah, for sure it is, and we definitely need to be investing. We need to be investing more. We need to be investing in clean and cheap energy, which is domestic. And fracking is a solution in terms of in the short term. In the long term, it's not particularly feasible. I wouldn't generally support it. But we're at a time where we need cheap energy.
And
we do need
nuclear energy is the future. I mean, seriously.
But you see, the irony is, it was the future when I was 8.
Yeah, and the irony is also that Nick Clegg has said just a few years ago that nuclear energy won't be needed in 2021. 2021. I wonder what's happened in 2021
Well,
that we need
and
energy.
then also, if we now look, nuclear is only making up 22%. We should be about 90% in terms of nuclear power. We know it is incredibly efficient a way to produce energy. And at the moment, right this minute, 62% is coming from gas. Of that, we import 50%.
This is what really quite angers me, actually, by a lot of these environmentalists, especially,
Oh yes, they're gluing themselves
Party.
to things.
Gluing themselves to things, telling themselves things, complaining about the environmental impact of fracking. Well, if you're that upset about it, you should have been supporting nuclear from the get-go.
Very, very quickly, Labour is in debt, a lot of debt, according to this in The Guardian, £4.8 million in deficit. Keir Starmer plans to raise £1 million in election funds in 3 months. Well, that's not going to go very far. And has also told the Shadow Cabinet to stop doing their own fundraising. He's also worried Unite and Unison may not donate. Is Labour in trouble?
It is a big concern. I mean, union donations have gone down from 88% to 58% of their total donations, and they have warned, Unite and Unison have warned that they might not necessarily be supporting them at the next election, so it's definitely a concern, and we've seen the funding drop. Having said that, there are more individual backers now, more than ever, and Labour membership has dropped, but for example, Lord Levy said he will back the Labour Party, and he often brings in a range of other backers, but I think they're having a lot of problems. They're still having to pay huge amounts from the Corbyn court cases, and they've lost, obviously, a lot of support from the trade unions, so it isn't an easy situation at the moment, and I think he's trying to set up his £1 million sort of war fund for an next election.
Well, it's coming soon, isn't it, Reem?
It is, absolutely. I think what will really be quite interesting is seeing this shift from union backers and union funders to then individuals. If that will see a change in policy, if actually there'll be a little bit more hard line towards the unions, and actually, because the way that they're funded really affects how their policy sort of navigates around it. But I think it'll be interesting to see if we see a shift in their sort of approach towards the unions.
Very interesting.
But I think,
sorry, last word.
No, I was just going to say, I think
Very
that already
quickly.
has been that shift, in the sense we've seen with the picket lines and Labour refusing to out-and-out back unions, so I think it might have already started, was what I was going to say, Reem.
You may well be right. Jonathan and Reem, thank you very much. Always such a pleasure
Thank you very much for having us
to
on.
see you after the break.